Chapter 27 of Erewhon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Laura Davis. Erewhon by Samuel Butler. Chapter 27. The Views of an Erewhonian Philosopher Concerning the Rights of Vegetables. Let me leave this unhappy story and return to the course of events among the Erewhonians at large. No matter how many laws they passed increasing the severity of the punishments inflicted on those who ate meat in secret, the people found means of setting them aside as fast as they were made. At times, indeed, they would become almost obsolete, but when they were on the point of being repealed, some national disaster or the preaching of some fanatic would reawaken the conscience of the nation, and people were imprisoned by the thousand for illicitly selling and buying animal food. About 600 or 700 years, however, after the death of the old prophet, a philosopher appeared, who, though he did not claim to have any communication with an unseen power, laid down the law with as much confidence as if such a power had inspired him. Many think that this philosopher did not believe his own teaching, and, being in secret a great meat-eater, had no other end in view than reducing the prohibition against eating animal food to an absurdity, greater even than an Erewhonian Puritan would be able to stand. Those who take this view hold that he knew how impossible it would be to get the nation to accept legislation that it held to be sinful. He knew also how hopeless it would be to convince people that it was not wicked to kill a sheep and eat it, unless he could show them that they must either sin to a certain extent or die. He therefore, it is believed, made the monstrous proposals of which I will now speak. He began by paying a tribute of profound respect to the old prophet, whose advocacy of the rights of animals, he admitted, had done much to soften the national character, and enlarge its views about the sanctity of life in general. But he urged that times had now changed. The lesson of which the country had stood in need had been sufficiently learnt, while as regards vegetables much had become known that was not even suspected formally, and which, if the nation was to persevere in that strict adherence to the highest moral principles which had been the secret of its prosperity hitherto, must necessitate a radical change in its attitude towards them. It was indeed true that much was now known that had not been suspected formerly, for the people had had no foreign enemies, and, being both quick-witted and inquisitive into the mysteries of nature, had made extraordinary progress in all the many branches of art and science. In the chief Erewhonian museum I was shown a microscope of considerable power, that was ascribed by the authorities to a date much about that of the philosopher of whom I am now speaking, and was even supposed by some to have been the instrument with which he had actually worked. This philosopher was professor of botany in the chief seat of learning then in Erewhon, and whether with the help of the microscope still preserved, or with another, had arrived at a conclusion now universally accepted among ourselves. I mean that all, both animals and plants, have had a common ancestry, and that hence the second should be deemed as much alive as the first. He contended, therefore, that animals and plants were cousins, and would have been seen to be so all along, if people had not made an arbitrary and unreasonable division between what they chose to call the animal and vegetable kingdoms. He declared, and demonstrated to the satisfaction of all those who were able to form an opinion upon the subject, that there is no difference appreciable either by the eye or by any other test between a germ that will develop into an oak, a vine, a rose, and one that, given its accustomed surroundings, will become a mouse, an elephant, or a man. He contended that the course of any germ's development was dictated by the habits of the germs from which it was descended, and of whose identity it had once formed part. If a germ found itself placed as the germs in the line of its ancestry were placed, it would do as its ancestors had done, and grow up into the same kind of organism as theirs. If it found the circumstances only a little different, it would make shift, successfully or unsuccessfully, to modify its development accordingly. If the circumstances were widely different, it would die, probably without an effort at self-adaptation. This, he argued, applied equally to the germs of plants and of animals. He therefore connected all, both animal and vegetable development, with intelligence, either spent and now unconscious, or still unspent and conscious, and in support of his view as regards vegetable life, he pointed to the way in which all plants have adapted themselves to their habitual environment. Granting that vegetable intelligence at first sight appears to differ materially from animal, Yet, he urged, it is like it in the one essential fact that though it has evidently busied itself about matters that are vital to the well-being of the organism that possesses it, it has never shown the slightest tendency to occupy itself with anything else. This, he insisted, is as great a proof of intelligence as any living being can give. Plants, said he, show no sign of interesting themselves in human affairs. We shall never get a rose to understand that 5 times 7 are 35, and there is no use in talking to an oak about fluctuations in the price of stocks. Hence we say that the oak and the rose are unintelligent, and on finding that they do not understand our business, conclude that they do not understand their own. But what can a creature who talks in this way know about intelligence? Which shows greater signs of intelligence, he or the rose and oak? And when we call plants stupid for not understanding our business, how capable do we show ourselves of understanding theirs? Can we form even the faintest conception of the way in which a seed from a rose tree turns earth, air, warmth, and water into a rose full blown? Where does it get its color from? From the earth, air, etc.? Yes, but how? Those petals of such ineffable texture, that hue that outvies the cheek of a child, that scent again? Look at earth, air, and water. These are all the raw material that the rose has got to work with. Does it show any sign of want of intelligence in the alchemy with which it turns mud into rose leaves? What chemist can do anything comparable? And why does no one try? Simply because everyone knows that no human intelligence is equal to the task. We give it up. It is the rose's department. Let the rose attend to it, and be dubbed unintelligent because it baffles us by the miracles it works, and the unconcerned business-like way in which it works them. See what pains, again, plants take to protect themselves against their enemies. They scratch, cut, sting, make bad smells, secrete the most dreadful poisons, which heaven only knows how they contrive to make, cover their precious seeds with spines like those of a hedgehog, frighten insects with delicate nervous systems by assuming portentous shapes, hide themselves, grow in inaccessible places, and tell lies so plausibly as to deceive even their subtlest foes. They lay traps smeared with bird-lime to catch insects, and persuade them to drown themselves in pitchers which they have made of their leaves and fill with water. Others make themselves, as it were, into living rat-traps, which close with a spring on any insect that settles upon them. Others make their flowers into the shape of a certain fly that is a great pillager of honey, so that when the real fly comes, it thinks that the flowers are bespoke, and goes on elsewhere. Some are so clever as to even overreach themselves, like the horseradish, which gets pulled up and eaten for the sake of that pungency with which it protects itself against underground enemies. If, on the other hand, they think that any insect can be of service to them, see how pretty they make themselves. What is to be intelligent, if to know how to do what one wants to do, and to do it repeatedly, is not to be intelligent? Some say that the rose seed does not want to grow into a rose bush. Why, then, in the name of all that is reasonable, does it grow? Likely enough, it is unaware of the want that is spurring it on to action. We have no reason to suppose that a human embryo knows that it wants to grow into a baby, or a baby into a man. Nothing ever shows signs of knowing what it is either wanting or doing, when its convictions both as to what it wants and how to get it have been settled beyond further power of question. The less signs living creatures give of knowing what they do, provided they do it, and do it repeatedly and well, the greater proof they give that in reality they know how to do it, and have done it already on an infinite number of past occasions. Someone may say, he continued, what do you mean by talking about an infinite number of past occasions? When did a rose seed make itself into a rose bush on any past occasion? I answer this question with another. Did the rose seed ever form part of the identity of the rose bush on which it grew? Who can say that it did not? Again I ask, was this rose bush ever linked by all those links that we commonly consider as constituting personal identity, with the seed from which it in its turn grew? Who can say that it was not? Then, if rose seed number 2 is a continuation of the personality of its parent rosebush, and if that rosebush is a continuation of the personality of the rose seed from which it sprang, rose seed number 2 must also be a continuation of the personality of the earlier rose seed, and this rose seed must be a continuation of the personality of the preceding rose seed, and so back and back ad infinitum. Hence it is impossible to deny continued personality between any existing rose seed and the earliest seed that can be called a rose seed at all. The answer, then, to our objector is not far to seek. The rose seed did what it now does in the persons of its ancestors, to whom it has been so linked as to be able to remember what those ancestors did when they were placed as the rose seed is now. Each stage of development brings back the recollection of the course taken in the preceding stage, and the development has been so often repeated that all doubt, and with all doubt all consciousness of action, is suspended. But an objector may still say, granted that the linking between all successive generations has been so close and unbroken that each one of them may be conceived as able to remember what it did in the persons of its ancestors, how do you show that it actually did remember? The answer is, by the action which each generation takes, an action which repeats all the phenomena that we commonly associate with memory, which is explicable on the supposition that it has been guided by memory, and which has neither been explained, nor seems ever likely to be explained, on any other theory than the supposition that there is an abiding memory between successive generations. Will anyone bring an example of any living creature whose actions we can understand, performing an ineffably difficult and intricate action, time after time, with invariable success, and yet not knowing how to do it, and never having done it before? Show me the example, and I will say no more, but until it is shown me, I shall credit action where I cannot watch it, with being controlled by the same laws as when it is within our ken. It will become unconscious as soon as the skill that directs it has become perfected. Neither rose seed, therefore, nor embryo should be expected to show signs of knowing that they know what they know. If they showed such signs, the fact of their knowing what they want, and how to get it, might more reasonably be doubted. Some of the passages already given in chapter 23 were obviously inspired by the one just quoted. As I read it, in a reprint shown me by a professor who had edited much of the early literature on the subject, I could not but remember the one in which our Lord tells his disciples to consider the lilies of the field, who neither toil nor spin, but whose raiment surpasses even that of Solomon in all his glory. They toil not, neither do they spin? Is that so? Toil not? Perhaps not, now that the method of procedure is so well known as to admit of no further questions. But it is not likely that lilies came to make themselves so beautifully without having ever taken any pains about the matter. Neither do they spin? Not with a spinning wheel. But is there no textile fabric in a leaf? What would the lilies of the field say if they heard one of us declaring that they neither toil nor spin? They would say, I take it, much what we should if we were to hear of their preaching humility on the text of Solomon's, and saying, Consider the Solomons in all their glory. They toil not, neither do they spin. We should say that the lilies were talking about things that they did not understand, and that though the Solomons do not toil nor spin, yet there had been no lack of either toiling or spinning before they came to be arrayed so gorgeously. Let me now return to the professor. I have said enough to show the general drift of the arguments on which he relied in order to show that vegetables are only animals under another name, but have not stated his case in anything like the fullness with which he laid it before the public. The conclusion he drew, or pretended to draw, was that if it was sinful to kill and eat animals, it was not less sinful to do the like by vegetables, or their seeds. None such, he said, should be eaten, save what had died a natural death, such as fruit that was lying on the ground and about to rot, or cabbage leaves that had turned yellow in late autumn. These and other like garbage he declared to be the only food that might be eaten with a clear conscience. Even so, the eater must plant the pips of any apples or pears that he may have eaten, or any plumstones, cherry stones, and the like, or he would come near to incurring the guilt of infanticide. The grain of cereals, according to him, was out of the question, for every such grain had a living soul as much as man had, and had as good a right as man to possess that soul in peace. Having thus driven his fellow countrymen into a corner at the point of a logical bayonet from which they felt that there was no escape, he proposed that the question what was to be done should be referred to an oracle in which the whole country had the greatest confidence, and to which recourse was always had in times of special perplexity. It was whispered that a near relation of the philosopher's was a lady's maid to the priestess who delivered the oracle, and the Puritan party declared that the strangely unequivocal answer of the oracle was obtained by backstairs influence. But whether this was so or no, the response, as nearly as I can translate it, was as follows. He who sins more than he ought, but he who sins not has much to be taught. Beat or be beaten, eat or be eaten, be killed or kill, choose what you will. It was clear that this response sanctioned at any rate the destruction of vegetable life when wanted as food by man, and so forcibly had the philosopher shown that what was sauce for vegetables was so also for animals, that, though the Puritan party made a furious outcry, the acts forbidding the use of meat were repealed by a considerable majority. Thus, after several hundred years of wandering in the wilderness of philosophy, the country reached the conclusions that common sense had long since arrived at. Even the Puritans, after a vain attempt to subsist on a kind of jam made of apples and yellow cabbage leaves, succumbed to the inevitable, and resigned themselves to a diet of roast beef and mutton, with all the usual adjuncts of a modern dinner table. One would have thought that the dance they had been led by the old prophet, and that still madder dance which the professor of botany had gravely, but as I believe insidiously, proposed to lead them, would have made the Erewhonians for a long time suspicious of prophets, whether they professed to have communications with an unseen power or no. But so ingrained in the human heart is the desire to believe that some people really do know what they say they know, and can thus save them from the trouble of thinking for themselves, that in a short time would-be philosophers and faddists became more powerful than ever, and gradually led their countrymen to accept all those absurd views of life, some account of which I have given in my earlier chapters. Indeed, I can see no hope for the Erewhonians till they have got to understand that reason uncorrected by instinct is as bad as instinct uncorrected by reason. End of chapter 27. Recording by Laura Davis.